Yeah. Hi. When you had a laugh, when last you had a good laugh? Can you tell me? But I have laughs all the time. I have laughs daily. And I don't need a joke to laugh. I have the joy of the Lord. And that is enough to make me just laugh. So I trust that you've had a good laughing day. Is that English? Yes, laughing day. Or I trust that you laugh before you go to sleep. Or I trust you laugh within the next hour. But laughter is good. It's good. It's a good, refreshing remedy for the heart that keeps it beating well, keeps you above aneurysms and arrhythmias, etc., etc. So it keeps you alive. So I want to encourage that. So some of you who may be home or have left home or going home, I hope when you get in your house you can laugh. How many of you laugh outside the house and don't laugh inside the house? You laugh with your friends, but you can't laugh with your family members because there's so much happening there. And those are real issues about the fact that we can seemingly have great times outside, but when it comes inside to the house, it's like, stiff jaws and frowns and lots of harsh words because we just don't seem to work it properly. I mean, ask people, why are you in a family? Why do you have a family? What is your concept of having a family? And I know that some of us may not be able to determine that or rather define it in terms of a sentence, but because that's what you know to have. You were brought up with a mommy and a daddy, and you were told that at some point in time it's time to get married and have a child or have children and get a home. We go down those things, and everybody has the premise that it's all going to be well. Everything's going to be right about it. Not realizing that there are a lot of assumptive issues that occur that continues to ratify, or rather we try to use that to ratify or justify maybe better with our behaviors. I thought you would have. Why didn't you? And then we use the A word, adult. You're an adult, you should know better. But those are all assumptions. And we have not realized that within the family dynamic, it has created itself its own conflict. And so most of the times when there's conflict within the family structure, we find that it all has to do with what someone assumed would have happened, or something that you thought should have been done by the other person who has knowledge or should have the knowledge of. And nobody is given the important concepts of communication that brings instruction and brings direction and brings results. No, we assume. So I want to talk a bit about that today. How can we overcome assumptions and have the realities of facts within the home? Firstly, how do we think of the partner that we have? Or how do we assess our children's behaviors and their own development within their formal environment, which has to do with their school, and the non-formal environment, which has to do with home and neighborhood? Do we see disparities there? Do we see agonies there? And understanding that what is taught in the home is different from what is taught at the school, and what is done at the playground will be different to what is done in the yard. We have not yet rationalized that. We expect our child, let me use the A with the other one. We assume that the child that we rear in the house is the same child in the school, the same child in the neighborhood, the same child in the playground. And the same thing for us. We think that the person with whom we live, called spouse or partner, has the same things that we grew up with, not realizing, not remembering, not bringing into our forebrain that, hey, we've all been socialized differently. We all grew up in different spaces, and therefore we need not assume. We need to find out, and we need to have facts. Let me get back to the child. You may groom your children in a very respectable, adorable, engaging, friendly way. They leave your home and go into a schoolyard with 600 other egos all have different perspectives of how family should be. Nothing like what your child would have been taught. And so they come up against negativity immediately. They're not finding the friendliness. They're not finding that respectful context. They're not finding that issue of love and engagement. No. They're finding people who are bullying and who are jeering and harassing. And all that is supposed to be childlike behavior. But it's different. For the child to survive, that child has to join in that kind of behavior. So the child that you know at home, nice and quiet and engaging and friendly, becomes antagonistic and bullying and offensive. And so therefore when that child comes back home, there's another personality that is now being suppressed because that child needs a smile. But one day, a sibling or a family member may come and say something that triggers the child in memory of what has happened before, and he or she blurts out, let's say a cuss word, or throw something, or get into a tantrum. We want to know, who is this? Also sometimes, when you get a telephone call from the child's school, and you hear come in, and when you go into the principal's office, you hear a list of behaviors that you wonder, I think the principal had the wrong child. That can't be my child. My child don't behave that way. So that there are all these assumptions of how people are living within the home as it is within out the home. And the same thing for adults. The parents, they live one way in that house, but when they get out there with their friends or even at work, it's a different kettle of fish. Because you are nice at home, maybe you are fine, but when you get to that again, you are up against the same principles or issues your children have. There's still the bullying, molestation, harassments, differences of opinions, methodologies are different, systems are different, and you are trying to make sure that your salary is not going to be affected. So your PA, where you have to have an assessment at the end of the year, you want to make sure you are compromising in certain ways to make sure that all is well, because there are assumptions that everything should be A-okay. I want you today to realize that when we live in that house called a home, when we are within the neighborhood, it is important for us to sit down and really define what is. I'm actually asking you to talk. I'm actually asking you to talk about yourself. Courtship periods are very elusive. They really do not define what's next in a family. They do not define dynamics that are real in terms of progression and development. It's all about emotion, trying to define if I want to marry this, about how I behave. But do we then, after the wedding ceremony, and you're now in that house, do you decide, or should you decide, or you must decide to sit down now and find out, to whom am I married? With whom am I living? I need therefore to investigate. Now I know you've done tidy knot, and you may want to untie it very quickly after you discover some things, because we have assumed. We need to sit down and really talk to granny, auntie. We need to even ask our proposed person, that person to whom you have proposed and who you now call fiancé. We need to find out, hey, what's happening? How has it happened? What happened to you at 5? What happened to you at 10? Tell me, how did you handle 15? How did you handle CXC exam? What games we need to find that out, because when we are now in the home and the family is developing in terms of size and maturity to the aspects of and conditions of humanity, we don't have time to talk about these things because we're busy making money. We're busy getting from mornings, flying out of the house. Sorry, not flying out. Busily getting ready, leaving the house and coming back. So when you leave very sprightly, very happily in the mornings, you come back haggard and exhausted in the evening. You really do not want to talk. You want to get into a place in your big chair, pull up your TV, look at it, eat some dinner, and relax because you had a hard day. But the family is missing out on that talk. They're missing out on finding out who each person is. So therefore we need to find much more context in terms of not assuming, because when that happens and something is, an instruction is given, we want to say, you haven't done that. Why ain't you? I expect you. Why ain't wash your ways? You should know that by now. Why didn't do this? Because we are assuming that the children are working with a particular knowledge plan that is absent. Because you assume what should be. The spouse is also working with a knowledge plan that is an assumption. Because there is no directive. Do that for me. What is that? That now? Yeah, nobody know what that is? You now come home. Why? I assume that you would come home at a particular time, because if you have left the office that day, that hour, you shall reach home now. Could we have a conversation? So that concept of talk is important to establish that relationship that is not assumptive but it's communicative. What happens with assumptions is that it creates unhealthy family relations. Which can be eventually come into the place where there's violence. We talk about domestic violence, we talk about abuse. Those things don't just happen. They come out of people's inabilities to handle conflict which comes out of assumptions. There is no collaboration. There is no communicating. There is no talk. And there is no behavior that is important to bring the reality for change. And for us to have that kind of perspective where we are working together for good. I want us to look a bit here about roles and rights, which I would have just intimated in the last broadcast. It's important for you, yes, to understand the role and the responsibility. The right is another thing. See, that right again, that's where the key issue of assumption is. How much lax or authority, I don't know if I'm using the word lax. Let's forget the word lax. How much authority do I have to exercise or to exert a particular action or to give a command? How much do I have? What is my right there? So, in that context, who has the right to establish responsibility for roles with the children? Or what should the spouse do? Or who should do what? Or when should it be done? How should it be done? Those are rights. I know my responsibility, I know my role, but who establishes the right to perform, the right to exercise, the right to bring the reality of? Who handles that? So it's important for us to come to the place where we do not assume the right. We establish directives. There's again the context of communication. What we want to avert is that conflict. Because conflict is when there are opposing concepts, opposing ideas on one matter, and there is no collaboration as to what direction should this particular activity take. So there is the to and fro and the disagreement on both sides that does not come to a place that says, hey, we will do it this way. Because there's a lack of communication. And I want to help us today to come to the place where we can begin to identify how to proceed to overcome conflict. And maybe we can talk about that in the next scene. I could begin to talk a bit about conflict management. It is therefore something to look at. Because one of the things that I think I should bring in here now is what has been promised. Hi. What has been promised? Was something promised? What did he promise? What did she promise? You took me from your father's house. You took me from my mother's house. Was there a promise to do something? Within the marriage ceremony, the concept of a promise that to love and to cherish and to, in sickness and health, and we have all this for better, for worse things. Those are concepts of promises. How do we work that out? How do we have the reality? What is the reality of that in things of working with promises? So we get into a family context and we work it out this with a promise content. You promise to get a house, you promise to get a job, you promise to buy this, there's always a promise. But there's an assumption with that promise that it will happen without, as I said in the last book, preparing for it, without recognizing that we are depending on personalities to effect these promises. But alas, there are weaknesses in the system in terms of what is available to make these promises real. So you would have assumed that you would get something. You'd assume he or she would be supplying and servicing this particular item. But there is no reality of what is for you because there is no proper communicating on that particular item. We have to realize that it's wanting to promise, fine, but how do I engage to bring the fulfillment of this promise? And how am I trusted to work with my partner that in a way that even when you do not see the fulfillment of that promise, you are still amenable to continue a relationship that is amiable? Because most times when the promise can't be fulfilled and delivered, conflict. And you hear the words, I don't trust you. This is not just about spouse. This works between parent and child. I promise you a bike. I promise you a trip. I promise you if you pass your exam. I promise you. We promise things. I promise you if you sweep the house. And sometimes after we have promised, we scratch our heads and say, wow, can I fulfill this? Where I get the money to? How can I? And next thing, that child is looking up to us with the assumption that it is going to happen. Because there's a promissory note somewhere floating in the atmosphere, waiting to be downloaded. At last, it doesn't happen. And that child absorbs that negativity of absence of the promise and says this big word of rejection and don't care. And we have a series of words that means that I am now pulling myself away and get into a corner because I can't trust my parents. If they tell me something, they never do it. We go to the office and you're promised that after 1 year, 2 years, you get an increment or you'll get a promotion. It doesn't come. So I can go on. In every dynamic that we work in every sphere, the dynamics are there working against us if we do not learn how to communicate and how to foster those relationships in terms of working together. I suggest that promising is something you could put on hold and say, look, there can be means. Be honest. If this happened, it would be nice for us to maybe reward you. And even when you're doing that, be careful to articulate the possibilities of how this may happen, because daddy or mommy now, or auntie or granny has to learn to prepare, as I said earlier in the last period, planting the seed to bring the fulfillment of that promise. Because we don't want an assumption that's going to kill us, or rather create that conflict in the near future. Let's see if we can be less assumptive. Let's not assume. Let's ask. Let's talk. Let's talk about what it takes to make something happen and how it happens well. Let's talk about how we can develop. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the possibilities that are there in terms of when something that is expected may not have the outcome. Let's not assume that what is said has to, what ought to be done must be done without giving directives. It's important for us to have that kind of interrelating and the communicating that establishes the way forward. We are maybe, and I think it's good for me, if we could look at conflict management and using this as a backdrop to engage how we can overcome that kind of situation within the family. So, bear this in mind. Let's look forward. Let's see where we're going. Let's not assume. Let's be directive. Let's be very assertive. Let's give the evidences. Let's give the solutions. Let's work together so we don't have to be disappointed and to feel that you've been rejected and nobody cares. We care. You are cared for. But we need to articulate that, come into a place where we can bring that camaraderie and establish dynamics that are forthcoming in terms of bringing wholeness and safety and security for the family. So, work that out with me. Let's see how you can help your family members in terms of how we are creating this new dynamic in terms of bringing that control within the family. And we'll do a little more about that in terms of conflict management in the next podcast. God bless you and have a great week. Dr. Niles saying, Shalom.